Welcome to Resilience Development in Action with Steve Bisson. This is the podcast dedicated to first responder mental health, helping police, fire, EMS, dispatchers, and paramedics create better growth environments for themselves and their teams. Let's get started.
You know, you've heard me talk about this before. Getfree.ai. Great for your note-taking, good for your transcript, good for your goals, good for everything that you do in a HIPAA-compliant nature. And if you use code STEVE50 at checkout, you will get $50 off your first month. And also, if you get a whole year, you will also get 10% off the whole year. But Getfree.ai has freed me to do more things with my life, including work on other passions. So get freed to do your notes, get freed from doing your goals. Getfree.ai with code STEVE50 to get $50 off your first month. Well, hi, and welcome to episode 232, part 2, with Doug Wyman. You know, like one of the things that we've been talking about, we talked about the unfortunate suicide of your wife, talked about your family, we talked about rural New Hampshire and how that works.
Yep.
But one of the things that's fascinating to me, right before this interview, you showed us a video. I didn't get to listen to the whole thing, but can't wait to link it in the show notes. We're talking about the process of supporting individuals when they start going into the first responder world, particularly law enforcement.
Yep.
Because that's where I think we fail sometimes with these wellness stuff and everything else. But I'd like you to talk about it because I think you can make a better story than I can.
I think one of the things we do when departments say we're going to have a wellness program is that it's not usually all-encompassing. It's usually left to like HR or somebody that has an interest.
Or EAP.
Or EAP or something like that it's their job. And it's not. And like I said in the previous episode, it's like, you know, it's one of these things that you have to be proud of your house. And if you're proud of your house, you're going to want people to come in. So this is everybody involved. Your dispatchers, your animal control, if you have that, the admin assistants, the officers, you know, the sergeants, the lieutenants, the captain, everybody has to buy into this.
Correct.
Okay? And it starts day one when that new hire comes in. Okay, and it not only does it start with them, but are we also including our families?
Yes.
Okay,
Very important
because one of the things is that, you know, we go to the academy and get trained to be a police officer. We may have a degree in it, so we know what's going on. Okay, but our spouses don't. Okay, when we come home from a shift. And you saw in that movie that I did show you about the dead baby, holding your first dead baby. That actually happened to me, and I was a new father when it happened. And it's like you come home and you're like, boom, there's nothing there, because what you just saw or what you just experienced. Even if they asked you, you've got no words for it.
How do you explain, really?
Yeah, and you're trying to still process it yourself. And a lot of times, and then couple that on, like we said, you know, the 200 traumatic incidences that are, you know, so keep compounding that, okay? And our spouses, sometimes you get it every once in a while. How many people out there have had, you know, when you walk through the door and mom says, Dad's home, okay? What does that mean?
Right.
Okay, does everybody go running for the hills, or is it, you know, the kids come up and, you know, hug you, or does that mean that Dad needs about 10 minutes or 15 minutes just to go and before he's able to engage?
Right.
Okay. I would submit that if it's everybody goes running for the hills, Houston, there's a problem.
Yeah.
So, but our spouses don't know how to deal with that.
But I would argue also that we don't teach our first responders how to communicate that.
Exactly. And that's why when you're having these wellness programs and you're putting them together, it's imperative that they're included in that process, because they're coming to this job with no training.
Right.
And they have their own expectations of how marriage should be, how you know, real or not, how being married to a firefighter or a police officer, is supposed to go. Okay, and it's not. It's 9 times out of 10, it's not that.
Right.
It's not that.
I think that's why the program is so important, because what I explain to some of the spouses, because again, I talk about cultural competency. If you're not a therapist that understands that if you work with first responders, spouses can come in, mothers can come in, fathers can come, you got to be able to communicate with all of them as well as the client.
Exactly.
You got to do that. But a lot of my guys that need that, and they really appreciate it. And when I say it to we talk about cultural competency, maybe I'm getting off subject here, but they're like, oh, you do that? You let them in? And I'm like, of course. Explaining to a spouse from a therapist standpoint that your spouse probably needs 15 minutes. Not the end of the world. Get them to just do the transition, because it's a hard transition, whether you're a police officer, a firefighter, an EMT, a paramedic, a nurse, an ER doc. I mean, I put all my guys in that. Like, there's a transition that my ex-wife understands. My current girlfriend, who is a nurse director who also worked in ERs, absolutely understands. But it's hard to explain to people. Like, he doesn't want to talk to you maybe for 10 minutes, but has nothing to do with you. And you need to have those conversations, but you don't teach our officers, our firefighters, and everyone else how to do so.
Because it goes to, you have to almost switch gears. It's like we're coming from a very linear, symmetrical, do this, do that way of communicating with people, to having to be compassionate and loving and being vulnerable.
Right.
Okay. And that can take a minute.
And your authority means a lot different at home than it means in a community.
Exactly. So you need to do that. The other part of it is that FTOs, field training officers, are critical in that, not only in career building, but also mentoring this.
Correct.
To the newer officers that come on board. So finding out what they want to do, where they want to go with the career, maybe what their interests are now. And when they graduate from FTO, writing those objectives and goals down, and that follows them when that first annual evaluation comes up, second evaluate, are we on career track? One of the things that also gets lost too is mentoring when you become a supervisor, mentoring when you become a lieutenant, mentoring when you become a chief, because you still need people to bounce stuff off of, but you also need support, but in a different way. And oftentimes what happens is that there's a big visual change when you become from officer to sergeant. So now your view becomes a little bit wider.
Right. Okay.
When you become a lieutenant or whatever, and you're in charge of a bureau, it becomes a little bit wider. Okay. And then, like I used to say, the view doesn't change until you become the lead dog.
Right.
Okay. So now when you're chief, okay, you've got the broader view, because you've got not only do you have an external view, but now you not only do you have that internal view, but you also have that external view, and you have to have it at 30,000 feet to be able to look at this stuff. And it's important, and I'll never forget the lessons that I learned. It's like right off the bat, my dad, when I was a kid, and he knew I wanted to be a police officer, although he didn't want me to be one, he says, you got to have a rabbi.
Yep.
You always have to have a rabbi. So
Absolutely.
like when I was a chief, I had 3 or 4 on speed dial that had been chiefs before that I could go, hey, I just need to bitch.
Yeah.
Or hey, I got this situation, what's going on here? The other part of it is too, and then often they get stuck in the cycle. And the academies do a pretty good job at this. They do a pretty good job with training you up to about the rank of sergeant.
Right.
Okay. So post that, it is very important that if you become a command officer, to network that way. Become a part of the organizations, the professional organizations like international chiefs, your state chiefs, New England chiefs, and stuff like that, so that you can find rank appropriate training, so
right.
that you can become, in your term, culturally competent in what you're doing, because you're gonna in those positions, you need to change your worldview a little bit and how you look at things. And like I told you earlier, like in the class that we teach at Roger Williams, we've had it come up a couple times now where whether it be a line of duty death or a suicide death in a department, where the chiefs have taken it upon themselves that this is what we're going to do. Okay? And it was completely wrong because their worldview doesn't have experience in suicide.
Right.
Or their worldview does include not maybe a personal experience with suicide, but maybe a religious experience with suicide as to what the scriptures may or may not say about that. Right. Or there may be some stigma attached to that where they feel that, it's either a selfish act or whatever, but that worldview is now inserted into that department's organization, and it may not be healthy. And whatever that process is in which what you're going to do at that point has to be inclusive, because your sergeants are the ones that are going to have to manage whatever you come down with. It is incumbent upon them to be able to keep the ship steered in the right direction, because if it isn't, it's going to go off the rails and it's going to sink.
Well, I think that I don't want to get too off the rails myself, but I want to mention this because we had a brief conversation about that. That's where I think people sometimes feel that administration betrayal. We'll call him Johnny, becomes a lieutenant, and Johnny changes and doesn't remember what being boots in the ground, and they feel betrayed because a decision has to be made financially or whatever the town manager decided, especially in New England. I don't want to talk about the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. How do you, if you don't have you talked about having that environment, that cultural competency, the department, so to speak, to do so. How do you deal with that administration betrayal or feeling that they're out of touch? Because in Massachusetts, we'll talk to the union. Okay, whatever. Yeah. But, how do we deal with that?
A lot of times it's using those critical thinking skills in your communication skills, okay, in that some of these things require conversation. Okay, some things are going to be within a chief's control or within the lieutenant's control. Other things are not. But those things need to be communicated, and it's pretty much procedural justice in that you treat people with dignity, you allow them to tell your story, you convey trustworthy motives, and you communicate those to them. Okay, so that, okay, well, we're going to go for 5% raises this year.
Right.
Okay, well, we're going to go for them. Doesn't mean we're going to get them. Right. Okay, so that process needs to be communicated as to what goes into that process, and that decision just isn't the chief's. That has a whole line of things to go through before it comes out on the other end. Well, you said I was going to be promoted to sergeant.
Right.
Okay, well, the position didn't come open. It
Right.
was either cut from the budget, okay, or the person that we thought was leaving isn't leaving, or it could be half a dozen different other things.
Yeah, I mean, what you describe is and again, with all due respect to some of the leadership I know, mm-hmm. what you're describing is a good leadership.
Yeah, you have to communicate to your people. You have to keep them informed.
But what if you don't have that? What if your leadership isn't that good? And I'm not trying to pick on anyone, just being devil's advocate here.
And I've experienced that where your leadership isn't that good, and unfortunately, it is going to take either a really good sergeant or a really good immediate supervisor to be the buffer for you to able you to endure that.
Right.
Or like in my case, I left.
Well, that's what we find, right? A lot of people end up leaving.
I left a certain department because it wasn't going to happen. No matter what I did, no matter what I did, it didn't matter. It wasn't happening. And then you just have to find your happiness. You have to at some point say, is it all worth it?
Right.
Okay, and if it is, then okay, it is. If it's not, then it's not. Things aren't, unfortunately, in this paramilitary organizations we have, whether it be police or fire, there is a hierarchy, there is an up and down,
Right.
And it does usually go up and down. It very rarely goes side to side. So, and like I said,
No, that's called gossiping. But anyway, go
yeah,
ahead.
well, exactly. But there are things that, again, there are things that are within the control of, and there are things that are not in the control of. I remember there was a department nearby me that they were complaining about their staffing levels, that their staffing levels were too low, and and that the chief should, have the part-time officers, work the shifts. Well, unfortunately, the chief couldn't, because the union contract said it had to be X amount full-time officers first, that the shifts had to go up first. And so, you have that again that throws it in the mix with your collective bargaining agreements. If it's a good one, the management and the rank and file, it's kind of a 50-50. There are some that management, for whatever reason, gives up some of their own flexibility, and now all of a sudden it's not. Particularly if you've come from departments, and this happens to be the department where like the chief wasn't even involved in the union contract; it was all the board of selectmen. They left the chief out of it, and it's like, how's that work? Because he's the one you want him to be able to manage the contract, and you're setting him up for failure. Is basically what's happening there. So there is, but it all boils down to, again, and we all have them. We've all had really great leaders, and we've all had some pretty shitty ones.
Correct.
Okay, and it comes down to, if you're a leader in a department, communication is key, and it's just not what you say, it's how you say it.
Correct.
And like I said, information's key. You don't have to give your people all the nitty-gritty about it, but hey, just to let you know, budget committee said, I know we said we were going to go for 5. They're offering 3.5. Okay, or they're offering 3.5 this year and maybe another 2.5 next
3, 2,
year.
1 or whatever.
Yeah, so we're kind of ahead of the curve, but whatever. But you don't need to go into that. Well, this selectman said this, and that one said that, and this budget committee member, blah 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 blah. You don't need to get into the nitty gritty. You don't need to get into the sausage making part of it.
No.
But again, treat people with respect and dignity. Allow them to tell their story. Okay, you convey trustworthy motives, and then you follow up on it. It's not rocket science.
I agree. I mean,
and if you treat your people like that, that's essentially what procedural justice is. And if you treat your people that way, it gives you legitimacy as a leader. And it builds morale that, hey, we might not have gotten what we want, but he told us the truth.
and that's why I explained to some of the leaders that I know that I work with, is like, you don't need to tell them everything about the making of the sausage, as you said.
Yep.
It's being able to convey why that decision was made in that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people forget those little things about asking the right questions, or asking, because, you talk about, going through the ranks.
Yep.
And sometimes an officer asks the sergeant, then asks the lieutenant before it gets to the deputy chief, and then it gets to the chief. And I call that the telephone game. And that plays a factor too.
Oh, in that telephone game, what that officer told that sergeant, who told that lieutenant, who told that deputy chief, who told that chief, by the time it gets to the chief, it's not the same message.
That's what I mean. I think that plays a factor. But one of the things that I'd go on and on about administration stuff, but I want to switch gears because I really want to talk about your program.
Yep.
I was looking at it right before, and you were talking about a square. Yep. Which I thought was a brilliant idea, but I'd like the audience to hear a little more about what you mean by that.
So the class that we teach at Roger Williams, to the first line supervision section, we call it kind of like the touchy feely huggy class, but and it's the last class. It's one of the last classes they have where we go over a bunch of stuff. But Suicide prevention is one of them. Suicide prevention awareness is one of them. Organizational wellness, post-traumatic growth. It's basically culminating what they've learned over the past 2 weeks that they've been there and making it kind of a practical exercise into one thing. So you have this one employee or maybe you got a couple of employees that something's off.
Right.
And whether it's, acute stress, whether it's post-traumatic stress, whether it's trauma, whether it's, whatever's going on in their life, something's different. But it's also about building wellness programs like we've talked about.
Right.
So in this exercise that we go through, it's based upon a movie that was filmed by the Nantucket Project back in 2019, and we developed this course over it, and we've been teaching it now for 6 years at the school. It's like I said, it's kind of an all-encompassing class, but it's well received. But it's more about, so a lot of officers up until that point learn, and they still learn about it. They learn about how to do self-care, self-wellness. So this is more like from an organizational level and collective. It's more collective care than it is anything else. Learning a little bit more about their officers, and doing, maybe taking the extra step with their people, in with that grand goal of creating that environment.
One of the things you said when we were talking right out there, you talked about, is it within the box or was it?
So
I want to hear that story because that was fascinating.
Yeah, so the box, so the class is called Inside the Box, and where that comes from is my teaching partner John Monahan and I. He did it before I did it, but we've both been to this class where it's called the Man Box, and it's based off of an organization called Boys to Men. And what it is essentially is, so you make this box and it's like, so what is it to be a man? And then you take all of these gender social constructs of what it is to be a man, okay, about, being a protector, being a provider, being tough, being, you get the whole thing.
Emotionless, being able to handle everything.
So is crying in that box?
Right.
Is going to a therapist in that box? Is, having a tea party with your daughter and painting your nails and having her put your hair in pigtails, is that in that box?
Right.
No, it's not. So what happens when you're out? What happens when you're outside of that box? Okay, and then we have an even smaller box, which is called the cop box. Okay, so when let's say just men on a generic form, that when they start feeling out of control or have a situation they can't control, who do they call? They call the police.
Right.
Okay. So what does it mean to be a real cop? What has been given to you as a police officer as to what that definition means? Okay. And usually or even you can do it with a soldier. Okay.
Right.
So what does it mean to be a good soldier, a good police? Be tough, follow orders, do this, do that. Okay. Well, is chronic stress and having nightmares in that box? Is, having to, whatever in that box?
Having flashbacks.
Yeah. So is that in, taking anti-anxiety medication? We had one class, a guy said, I got a therapist on speed dial. The other one's the girlfriend barometer. He goes, my girlfriend says, whenever I come home and I'm starting to feel stressed a little bit, she goes, you need to go see a therapist. And I do it. Is that in that box of what it is to be a cop?
Identifying as bisexual, identifying as...
Yeah, and then throw that into it, but then that becomes intersectionality too, where boxes start to overlap, and it's like, okay, well, how does this all fit together? Well, it does because it's you. Okay, and then one of the things that we teach in this class it's called the eyes of oppression. So, but how do you counter an organizational culture? So you've got the eyes of oppression. You've got ideology, institution, interpersonal, and then internal. So, and we have usually a couple women in the class. So we go, okay, so back in the 1970s, how many women were in law enforcement? Not that many. Why? Because the ideology was a bunch of white guys said, this is man's work, okay? Which then comes into how the institution perceives itself, how then goes into how these interpersonal relationships happen, and then you as the person in that organization have to internally focus on yourself about, okay, so what parts do I snap off, or what parts do I improve, or what parts do I don't talk about so I can get along in this organization?
Right.
Okay, so you counter that by, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution skills, communication skills, and you're able to go the other way. It's that diffusion of innovation, being able to kick it in reverse and go the opposite direction. That's how organizational culture becomes better.
Right. Well, I go back to what you just talked about, and what comes to mind is I teach a lot about the four agreements.
Yep.
About not taking things personally, not making assumptions, doing your best every day, and being impeccable with your word. Being able to learn those four things is such an important aspect, because a lot of the things, like as a cop, you learn not to take everything personally until you do.
You have to. It's just business.
But until you do.
Until you do.
That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and then reminding people constantly, don't take this personally. It has nothing to do with you. It's not you. People have a box for therapists. That's not about me. That's the box that people create. So that's why I like the idea of a box, because you talk about women and then women in law enforcement. Now they have an they should got to show even less emotion because they're in this job and they're being judged.
And they got to work. And anyone will tell you they got to work doubly hard because they feel that they got to prove their chops.
Right.
Even though they don't. They bring an entirely different.
But that's what the culture is. Let's acknowledge it.
Yeah. Well, that's what that ideology is. That this is men's work.
Right.
Okay. And same thing in the fire. It's same thing in the fire service. It isn't any different.
I faced that too when I worked in when I first started. This is years ago in the jail diversion program. I was called the Hug a Tug program. Yep. And you're going to hug them? I'm like, no, it's not my goal at all. It's not. I'm trying to if they're mentally ill, we want to put them in the right space, not in jail. Mm-hmm. But you're going to hug them, right? I'm like, I don't know why I'm supposed to hug everyone.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is that they hear. Maybe it's a defense mechanism, but you hear it even now. It's like the social workers responding with police and stuff like that. It's misunderstood.
Very much so.
It definitely has its place, and it's mischaracterized tremendously. Because it even goes to our class when we're teaching the suicide awareness part of it. We have a QR code on it for the guys to download the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. I says, so you're on the Bourne Bridge at 3:00 in the morning, okay, trying to talk a jumper off, okay, and you're trying to figure out whether or not you need to take them to the hospital. Well, the fact that they're on the bridge should give you a clue. Right. But I says, rather than searching for it, why don't you just pull out either a laminated card or pull it up on your phone? These are the questions. If they answer 4, 5, and 6, or even to a fellow officer that's having a problem, okay, if they answer yes to 4, 5, and 6, they're going to the hospital. And I'm like, folks, I says, this is the same thing that when you get them to the ER, this is the same thing they're going to use.
That's what I'm going to use.
It's the same thing. So why reinvent the wheel?
Well, I'm going to finish on this. I'm hoping to have one of the initiator of the jail diversion program, Dr. Sarah Abbott, which I worked with her when we started the program. She's going to be on in a few weeks, hopefully.
The current director, her office is just down the hall from mine at DMH, is Joanne. So,
Joanne, and I love Sarah. I absolutely adore Sarah. I worked with her for a while. But how about if people want to reach you? How do we reach you?
So I have I'll give you my Mass email. So it's douglas.wyman2@mass.gov.
Yep.
My personal cell is 603-986-6487.
Yep.
My work cell, it's going to be funny, but I have to look. So it's 857-289-5993. And, we do classes for Roger Williams 4 times a year for first line supervisor. We do it for command. We've done it for several area departments. So if you're interested in it, we'll put it on for your department.
Well, Doug, I'm hoping that you come back on the show at some point again. Really enjoyed talking to you.
My pleasure.
And I hope that we even develop, I know I put the pressure on you, but I do hope we develop a friendship because I really enjoy talking.
Absolutely, positively.
Well, this is it, folks. This is episode 232 and I hope you come back for episode 233, and thank you for your time.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.